Welcome to another 2024 election prediction. Today, using logic only for the second time, we're going to add a remix to this whole idea and concept that I invented by saying, you know what? What if we got somebody who is high IQ but doesn't follow the day-to-day politics like we do? What if we asked them who was going to win in this election? Because it's pretty clear that while we can look at maps and we can look at graphs and charts and polls every other day and get little slight changes and variations to the models that people make, we understand that most people don't have time to do that and they're not as interested. And so let's see what these people really think. The reason why I care about this and why you should too in chat is because, of course, these people are going to be voting way more than election nerds will. And so truth is that their opinion and guesstimation as to what's going on is going to dictate whether or not they turn out. Because if we all sell a bill of goods that says that Trump's going to win, a lot of people that might be sympathetic to that vote of thinking or mode of thinking, is going to obviously not vote because they think, well, we got it in the bag. Well, you know what? That's probably not the best thing. So let's see where the turnout, where the enthusiasm is. Let's see what the average layperson would think here. So obviously, a lot of the map would be filled because, again, this is somebody who does not really read the news every single week, catches bits and pieces, goes to work every day, does not look at the charts at all, doesn't look at the polling, the favorability, just goes off of snippets he sees on TV and talking to people in America, going to the grocery store, seeing how hot Cheetos are now over $6, stuff like this, real tragedy, so to speak. Now, he would probably refer to 2016 first and foremost. Again, Trump is going for a third term here. Third election run, at least. And when you look at it one way, you'll notice that this was the election. Okay, that's the actual outcome. That being said, we can also look at 2020, and you'll see that it's a rerun of that election, and you'll notice that Biden won this one. Of course, now, if you're looking at this for just any common sense case, you can dictate that a lot of these states are guaranteed to go one way or the other. Now, it's a pretty even map as we look at it here, but there's plenty of toss-up electoral votes here for grabs. Right now, a layperson would probably say that unless it's an absolute blindside, that these states would go blue. Okay, so Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia. This is just obvious to anybody. I think that while people would see that the economy overall sucks, it doesn't take somebody who's paying attention to notice. In fact, a glancing below at any paper would look at this. Walking in the grocery store for 30 seconds as compared to 5 years ago, you can really feel the effects of inflation. That being said, of course, it doesn't really mean that there ought to be this big change in the results, because people that know politics as of the last 8 years know that elections are dictated by the sway of like maybe 5% and not really any more than that. So for a state, for people to check and see that these went D plus 10 in these last two elections, as the same case for Virginia almost, we'll notice that this will go blue again. Minnesota might be a little different, though, because somebody could look at Minnesota and look at the results and see that while obviously the state has gone blue forever, really, we also know that this is a uniquely bad circumstance for the Democratic Party. We do know that they're lower on funds relative in a ratio compared to the Republican Party. But in fact, people wouldn't know that in the layperson logical lens. But what they would know is that while the economy also sucks, they also have an incumbent problem in the Rust Belt. Most people, even living in Arizona, can probably tell that the Midwest is being unaccounted for. Economically, they are being trounced by the Chinese. The foreign competition is cannibalizing industry. But moreover, they also have a vulturistic capitalistic economy that is not working for them. In fact, when you look at it one way, a layperson would look at Joe Biden as a stopgap measure against Trump, but it doesn't mean that there's an economic reform plan in the works, okay? So a layperson would look at the decaying of the Midwest and see that it's uniquely bad in places like Minnesota, Wisconsin, etc. That being said, I think that a logical person might think that Minnesota is in play. So I'm putting that red. Now, this is a controversial opinion. Again, I'm going to be all over the place, but most people wouldn't have a concept of how to pace these videos given that they don't watch this sort of stuff, okay? We're getting the layperson's opinion. I also do believe that Georgia is likely to go red in this prediction, if only because people can notice that the things that made Georgia blue in the first place are really incidental to 2020 and that alone. When you look at the turnout percentages, these are just awfully out of line with what we usually see. In fact, if you get somebody in an LSAT test, you're being tested over reading comprehension. And when you look at a whole poll series, and again, we're not looking at the contemporary ones, but when we look at turnout percentages year over year and decade over decade, the sort of turnout that we saw in 2020 is an anathema to 2016. And while we all know that things are really bad for the Democrats and overall for the country under their control, we know that the layperson can then surmise logically and deduce that the turnout is going to be lower for Democrats and up for Republicans. So when we see an explosion of Democratic turnout in places like Fulton County, Gwinnett, etc., DeKalb, you'll notice that it's going to lean towards Georgia going red by that logic. And also, an even more exaggerated version of my logic is also proceeding in the state of Florida. When you look at the place, you'll notice that it trended blue in some places, but overall red, despite it being a blue victory overall for the nation. That being said, it's likely due to the fact that the Cubans are going more red than before. As we all know, Florida is changing demographically. And we do know that the Republicans are just trending better in that place as of the last 6 years straight. That's a good sign. I think most lay people could understand that. I think that when they look at the map, they notice how the Hispanic areas of the country are actually trending red for whatever reason, and that might actually hold true in Florida, which has a lot of Cubans, a lot of blow. We got to put this red as we know. So we can move on to North Carolina. I think North Carolina is a more interesting one. The prognosis might be a little different here. We do know that the black enthusiasm for Joe Biden as a layperson is really low. We see how it was abnormally high in 2020, yet in 2024, we really don't have a reason to vote him in. And by we, I mean the suit is black at least. But listen, the point is that I think a normal person of a 56%er race, okay, like a complete glob of people, okay, we don't have, the person we're thinking here logically isn't going to be a black or a white, but instead is going to be somebody who is going to be peering into the dynamics of every racial relation. And when you look at it this way, North Carolina is certainly emblematic of what's happening writ large with the nation. That being exactly what? We see rampant crime. We see a bad economy. This obviously impacts black people more because they have to live around each other and they tend to be in very poor areas. Places like in North Carolina that you don't want to live in. Me personally, I think that they will probably not vote as harshly blue as before. And again, the rurals trended red in 2020. So I think anybody with logic would say that North Carolina is going red. Also, they would notice that North Carolina is traditionally more Republican, at least in the 2016 vein, as is Georgia, and Georgia's red by their logic. So again, common sense would just dictate this. New Hampshire's a difficult one for certain because that state actually went blue by a lot. It went blue by about 7 percentage points in 2020. And when you look at the actual trend line for the entire state, you'll notice how bad it was for Donald Trump. In fact, you look at all these and it's a cacophony of blue, despite it being relatively rural and relatively white. And what that tells you is that the state's likely to go blue by common sense. Now, looking on to Nevada, I think this one's very interesting because it's been historically blue, actually. But when you look at it with more detail, I think somebody would actually notice with the logic. And if you look at this mosaic, we're presented with the fact that Nevada, out of all the other states, is going to be really, really prone to this Hispanic trend line that's going towards the red. The reason being, of course, is that Joe Biden polls bad with Hispanics, and that you saw that despite losing in 2020, Donald Trump did better in the Hispanic areas than he was predicted to do. And the metropolitan areas are not thriving under Biden because, of course, the economy sucks. And so when we're looking at a place where there's a sizable population like Vegas, you see that there's a lot of Hispanics that are going to be trending red. And you'll notice that the county of Clark County that houses Vegas actually trended about a percentage point more Republican, despite the fact that the country voted 5 points to the left of that notion, which is to say that it is trending red. Okay, so that's very clear. So let's fill these out. So we're almost at a Trump victory, by the way. A Nebraska 2nd district, again, a layperson would have no idea how to dictate that. A layperson wouldn't know what the dynamic is there. And so they would see that it went blue in 2020 and just leave it as is probably. That being said, same rule applies in Maine, where, again, nobody really knows what this works as, at least people that aren't nerds like me. Moving on. When we look at Arizona, I think Arizona is also an extension of Nevada. I think there's about a 90% chance that both of them have the exact same election result. And by that, I mean that one, if, let's say both go for Trump, there's like a 90% chance that they do both go for Trump. You know what I mean? It won't be a 1-for-1 ticket split. That being said, we do have an election here in which Joe Biden in particular, and again, to a layperson, you would probably observe that a lot of the same phenomena in Nevada applies to Arizona, in that the Hispanic vote is going to be very tantamount to a victory in the state. But let's look on it more so. So again, it hardly went blue in 2020. But if we look at the places that did go blue, it's not necessarily these Hispanic parts, but more so the white suburbs. The white suburbs are dealing with a candidate in Joe, an incumbent really, who isn't really in a particular stance to be reelected. The reason being, and I think, again, a layperson would know this, is stemming from the fact that the guy has no riz per se. What I mean is that the guy has no charisma. He does not have a survivorship instinct. He does not have a reason to really vote for him outside of what's going on. So, for instance, if the economy were really good, healthcare was good, all of it was kosher, I think Biden would win because he's not an evil person per se. He's not the biggest dickhead in the world. No, but what he is lacking overall in charisma. And he isn't, and it also isn't always because he's old, but I think most lay people understand that somebody such as a Reagan was old, borderline senile towards the end of his second term, but also an affable, lovable elder statesman, which is different and contrastable to the Biden administration's mishandling of his personal outgivings. And what I mean is, like, obviously the guy's not coming off the best whenever he speaks the little that he does. That does not engender any sort of confidence in the suburban wine mom, and you need that sort of vote, okay? So over some Pinot Grigio, we need to put in this Republican ballot and fulfill the state as a red one, because it's very clear to a layperson that there's a lack of riz from Joe Biden. And so again, if things were really crappy, but the president was affable and cool, like maybe Obama in 2012, then he would have a better fighting shot than he does now, where he not only has a bad economy, but also a situation in which he's not affable either. And so there's no real reason to like him. Also, people might say, well, Trump doesn't have riz, and he clearly does, but it's a polarizing one, so I get it, you know? It's like if you go for like the e-boy effeminate look, maybe some girls in high school and college will find you attractive, but then anybody else doesn't. And so the same way that Donald Trump appeals to a bunch of, let's say, rural folk and, country people and whatever, but then he pisses off the metros, we get that. That being said, it's still booming. It's still booming. The metros are not going to be booming, in fact, for people like Joe Biden. And so that sort of appeal is nominally interesting because, again, having a sort of appeal trumps having no appeal and being bland, especially when things are going bad. In fact, contrast that with Donald Trump's popularity. His popularity to a lay person using logic only would, under no circumstances, be that high because, of course, in 2020 he lost and he hasn't engendered a ton of support back. But what he does have is staying at a relatively high, let's say 48% approval, whereas we have somebody in Biden who, again, we don't read polls. We're just a lay person. That being said, a civilian can tell that the guy's lost a lot of faith. In fact, a lay person can actually view a clip from 2020 when he was elected to now, and in less than 4 years, he definitely looks a lot more run down, speaks more slowly, and messes up his words more often. That is that much more clear. Now, so even though maybe somebody won't predict that he's down negative 15 percentage points in approval rating, they would probably tell that he's down, let's say 5 or 10, because that's just logical. And obviously, if you just barely win in these electorally viable states in both parties by tens of thousands of votes in each, we understand that I think a small disapproval loss would actually hurt Biden, and dramatically so, according to a logical person that does not read the polls like we do. So I think we can lead this off with Wisconsin. Wisconsin, if we look at the map, again, so we're going to be giving a cheat sheet to every person in this video called the NY Times election map, because this is going to be really referential towards getting a right opinion here. As you guys can see, the suburban areas and the metro areas certainly, and again, the college towns, very much blew up for Joe Biden. That being said, when we look at certain parts, we see that the rurals are strong, which means that the foundation for the electoral viability of any candidate is strong when they got the rurals on their back. Now, granted, let's look at what's happening here. First and foremost, we have a place in these areas right here in between the cities that are not really populated. In fact, when you look at these, it seems like these rural people did not turn out like they should have. And I think a logical person would deduce that this is going to go up due to the effects of farm prices going up, agriculture, all this stuff. I think it'll all trickle down to better results for the Republican Party. That being said, of course, we do have the wild counties, Waukesha, we have Ozaki and stuff like this, okay? These sort of counties are going to trend more Republican than you're used to. I think a couple of reasons exist for this fact. Obviously, the same logic that applies to suburban Arizona and Georgia applies to places like Wisconsin and Michigan. I think a lot of people that viewed Biden as a stopgap measure against Trump are now not going to turn out because Biden himself has gotten somehow worse. So it's like when you maybe date an ugly chick because there's only another fat chick that's interested in you, but then the ugly chick got fat as well. So it's like, okay, well, you might as well go pretty fat than ugly fat. And so I think people see Trump as the pretty fat and not the ugly fat in Biden. Okay, so I think that's going to be the vague calculus. Again, that's not maybe the most logical, but it's the most common sense one. Decision that is. Okay, now we see the trend line for Michigan, and it's a pretty egregious one. Again, very awful results in the suburbs for Donald John Trump. Now, that being said, the same logic applies And also, there's more of an element of the third world. We do have more of, again, this percolating Gaza issue. And I think using the common sense story of how, for the Gen Z vote, this will be seen as a trending red thing. I think people that see a little bit of TikTok understand that things are a little more open when it comes to censorship. In fact, despite it being kind of rigorously censoring of people, I think a lot of truth gets out there. I think people that are laypersons can understand that fact. And even more so than that, we do know this Gaza thing is hurting the Democratic Party. I think it doesn't take somebody that watches the polls or the news understand that fact. And so when you're looking at it that way, you can see that things are percolating in the negatives. And I think a common sense civilian can see this for what it is. Now, Michigan is going red. But even beyond this, I think somebody can notice that when they have, hot Cheetos being $3.50 for a normal bag, under Trump. And then now a couple years later, it's $6. Okay. I swear to God, it's a big deal to me. Okay. You notice, and it's like, oh my goodness, the young people cannot be loving this. Okay. It's up 45 percentage points. This price of the biggest commodity for a lot of these people. Okay. Why do you think the Latino vote's going its way? Okay. Now, moving on, we do have one more state. We do have Pennsylvania. I think this is going red, obviously. I think a layperson could understand despite even not being from the state. In fact, we could have this layperson be from Missouri for all I care. We know that Pennsylvania has suffered more under Joe Biden than any other state. You could argue because, of course, the state has not only a crime problem in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, we also have leadership that is not adequately supplied licensing in the federal case for oil exploration or for drilling. Again, vital centers for the economy are not being met. They're not being fed. And, from a liberal point of view, it's not even like you're planning nuclear plants. It's not like you're putting wind farms or something super tacky like that. But instead, you're doing absolutely nothing to fix the economic woes. So this becomes a worse issue, of course. And I think somebody with a layperson's understanding could follow that this would go red just logically. And so your final result is going to be 322 electoral votes to Biden's 216. If you guys want a foolproof way of understanding how this works exactly, we need to understand that in the case of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, this is looking very, very, very easy to tell and to predict, because I think that this is an important perspective insofar as obviously people that are not well read will honestly still read the situation and open their own eyes and understand that the race is going red. And what's more is that it's important to really get out the fact that this is logical without using the charts, so that when there's a confirmation bias, you can debunk that assertion by saying, you know what? Yeah, I have a confirmation bias, but it's also in line with logic. It's in line with reality. Reality is that Donald Trump is winning in all regards. And when it comes to other factors such as like a conviction and stuff like this, again, this is if somebody doesn't really read the news, just if they have a vague understanding of what's going on. So it's like a waking up from coma prediction. This is like if Rick Grimes woke up prediction, it's insane. It's insane stuff. Comment down below what you thought. This is the earliest video I've recorded in a really long time, hence why I'm scramble brain. But guess what? That made the prediction just more authentic. Okay, so I'll see y'all on the next one. Adios. And like the video. Bye.